Hi, I'm your host, Rick Sessinghaus, and excited to launch Flow Golf Podcast. Each episode, we will share stories, interview experts, and share cutting-edge strategies for peak performance. Here's my co-host, Hallam Morgan, to explain more about FlowCode Golf.
Thanks, Rick. FlowCode Golf is a framework of strategies, principles, and techniques that take us from fear to the state of flow, the state of optimal performance, and the zone where we play our best golf. You can find out more about FlowCode Golf at www.flowcode.golf. And I just want to finish up by saying this podcast is as much your podcast as it is ours. So please ask questions, provide feedback, and get engaged. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. The first question I have for you, Martin, is where did this all begin? Where did it all start? Where did you find your love and passion for habits?
Well, nothing of significance happens really overnight. And the habit factor begins with my journey from absolute frustration, even anger. I really struggled, Hallam, with achieving goals, with just how do I get from point A to point B? And what I recognized over time was it was far less about the to-do list and far more about the core recurring behaviors or habits. And the origin story goes something like this. I recount this, of course, in the book, but I set this really big bucket list type goal. It was to paddle from Catalina Island to Manhattan Beach, and in all it's 32 miles. And I set the goal because I had struggled so much with the process. And I was like, if I die tomorrow, it seems like a silly question, but really it provided so much clarity. If I died tomorrow, what would I most regret? And out of that exercise, a bizarre imaginary exercise, came this challenge, this goal to paddle 32 miles. And then I panicked. And it just so happens I have my tracking sheet right here with me. But what originated out of this challenge and that question was this process. And it had nothing to do with SMART goals or a to-do list. And it had everything to do with practicing intentionally the core related behaviors, the habits that will lead me to my goal. And so since then, we have a podcast, of course, called Habits to Goals. And that's the methodology we've been teaching now for 15 years. And actually, that's how I met Rick.
Love that. Love that.
Right.
Just to go a bit deeper on that methodology, I know you present the PAR method. I know that's plan, act, record, reassess. Could you, just to set the scene for our listeners, could you just go into a bit more detail on what those different stages are and how you apply that method in order to actually implement and sustain habits?
You know, what's fascinating now is, and I got, let's say, a little bit of slack for that at the beginning, or flack, I should say, because the existing science, and again, Rick knows this, but the existing science around a habit is something called, and I want to paint a picture for you, the distinction between PAR and Cue, routine, reward. So cue, routine, reward is based on the science of studying rats and mice, rodents. And by the way, in a maze. So they put them near a maze, right? And they put cheese in the maze. And the cue was the rodent saw the maze and went through the maze and found the cheese. And they thought, wow, this really applies to humans. Because what happens is, you have a cue and then you get a reward the faster you go through the maze. And the challenge with that is we're obviously not rodents. So we have three unique capacities. So I'm still getting to the PAR method. I just want to set this up. The innate human capacities of choice, right? We can choose our habits. We're not a rodent. So first problem with cue, routine, reward. We can choose our habits intentionally. Then we can plan them. Rodents aren't planning their new habits. And then we can reflect. So what I proposed 15 years ago, is set a plan. That is your intention. And you can even, I mean, frankly, there's no better cue than a plan. So you have a plan, then you act, which creates self-efficacy. A lot of the reason people really struggle, and I know this was my case, if you feel like you're not in control of things or your life, then what happens is you're unhappy. And when you're unhappy, bad things happen, bad decisions happen. So by checking off, if I say, Hallam, that I'm going to do 10 push-ups today, and I do 10 push-ups today, I feel great. I've proved I'm in control. So we plan, we act, we record, which is simple as a check. And in following this process, it's just binary. It's ones and zeros. And then we reassess after 28 days. So what that looks like, if, say, I want to lose weight, that's my goal. A lot of people use this to lose weight. My goal is to lose 15 pounds. Identify 3 habits. So let's say jog for 15 minutes, 3 times a week. So that's the plan. And then the question is, how long? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 40 minutes? Typically, we want to set the bar very low. So we plan, we identify the days of the week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 15 minutes, and then we act, we record, and we reassess. The other 2 habits might be, I'm trying to move through this quickly, but the other 2 habits might be eat a salad 3 times a week and drink 8 glasses of water. So those are 3 habits I'm going to track for 28 days, 4 weeks, and then I'm going to reassess. And if I do well, so I happen to be wearing this shirt. I don't know if you can read this.
Yes.
What's it?
Habit strength.
Habit strength. So the idea is we track and reassess over a 28-day period, and then we raise the bar. So now it might be 4 salads a week if I never ate 1 salad a week. It may be running for 40 minutes if I did 85% or better, running for 20 minutes. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And what I appreciated reading the book way back when is because I love the book so much that I reached out to you, and I've never contacted another author since.
That's amazing to me.
Was how it how it applied, obviously as a golf coach, is that I have a lot of people who have goals. They want to shoot lower scores, but there's a huge disconnect with the actions. And what I had found, and you just mentioned it, is I'm a big believer in small incremental steps that done over time now become a habit, which now becomes a behavior. Now we don't have to think about it as much, but people don't take enough time to really assess, well, one, if it's working or not, but back to the goal of what are those habits and behaviors. They just say, I'm going to practice more. And that's just too vague, right? We want to know, maybe we need to work on wedge proximity to the hole, closer to the hole. How I'm going to do that is I'm going to space out 3 days a week where I'm going to work. That's what I appreciated from you, is that you're taking it, not just even actions, but the other part is the values with it, the energy we want to bring to those habits, because you're connecting it that I do the habit, it gets me closer to my outcome. Yet we've all talked too about, it's not about the outcome, it's about the process. But I think what I learned from you is that it is both. It has to be both.
Right.
You can't have a plan unless you know what the outcome is.
And people, it's dichotomous thinking. Coaches, I mean, it's all over the business world. People say, you got to do this, don't do this. You got to do this, don't do this. So often it's both. What I love, first of all, you were the very first Habit Factor certified professional, and you couldn't model a better pro. That the second part of that is, it's a blessing and a curse. The Habit Factor is such a general framework. I didn't want to come out with a book and say, and this is no offense to the legend, of course, Dr. Stephen Covey, but I didn't want to say it's about 7 habits or the millionaire habits. What I was saying is, this is about the force of habit, singular. And it's so powerful. It's not about 7 habits. It's not about a millionaire habit. It's so powerful that a guy like Rick, who's an expert in golf, can look at this framework and say, this is the outcome, these are the behaviors, and he can custom tweak it and craft it. And this is why it works so well for coaches in every field, whether whether you're trying to lose weight or become a better golfer.
Love that.
Right.
Something.
And that's,
Go on, Rick.
I was just going to say, that's part of our philosophy of FlowCode is we are creating a framework, and we want somebody to experiment and find out what the triggers are and because I think that's part of life, is not to just be told this is what you do. But the last thing is, and I just want to reiterate the importance of when you feel like you're in control of something, there's more momentum in that. And I again, go back to, let's get those small wins along the way. Let's make those checks. Let's build momentum. And then you start to see yourself as a different person, which of course is what we're trying to do in 28 days.
Absolutely. Yeah. What makes it so powerful is the momentum itself. What happens is, and again, I think I said it, but just to be clear, we identify the basic targets of any practice period. So if it's 20 minutes of putting, we don't get 2 checks if we putted for 40 minutes, all right? Because habit, and I know this isn't proper English, Hallam, so don't kill me. Habit doesn't care about bursts of energy. That was one of my big struggles. I used to be like, I'm going to run a marathon, and then I'd go out and run 13 miles and I'd be sore and I'd never run again for 4 months. That's not that's not how it works. By planning, acting, recording, and reassessing, that's how we can get there. It just occurs to me, the one other thing that I didn't say is science is now coming kind of full circle. There are new, and I think I've shared this with you, Rick, and I've certainly talked to Glenn about it. There are multiple studies now talking about the significance of intentional practice in habit development. So supporting, Wonderful. Of course, this PAR methodology.
Absolutely love that. Martin, I want to go, and Rick mentioned it. He said in that 21 days or 28 days, you want to change who you are. So I want to talk a bit more about identity, because something that I believe in is that we should want the process of becoming more so than the moment of achieving. I speak about it with a lot of my players. They're seeking or hoping to get to the European Tour. Most of them want that European Tour card more than they want the process of becoming a European Tour player. So when it comes to identity and habits, how important is that relationship? And even you mentioned in terms of losing weight, should you want to become a healthy individual more so than you want to just lose weight? Is that important? Is that an important differentiation when it comes to habit formation and sustaining habits for the long term?
It's critically important. What I think a lot of people are forgetting in this, there's so much talk about identity now, like that's some massive breakthrough. What I like to go, let's go way, way, way back. The Latin root of habit. Do you happen to know what that is? It's okay. I'm not putting you on the spot.
I would love to hear it.
It's habitus, and it means condition or character. What was that last word I used?
Character.
What is character? Identity. So this is just another person out there tweaking ideas. But yeah, I've been talking about this for a very, very long time. And we can see this with a guy like Benjamin Franklin. Okay. What was he doing? Do you know this story about Benjamin Franklin? Anybody? No? Oh, come on.
Well,
No, I know there's so many. There's many different ways to go. I
was practicing on the golf course. I skipped history class.
Okay. So this is fascinating, and you never want to forget this ever again. This is why, in many ways, he's considered like the founding father of all personal development. Almost. I mean, you could look at Aristotle, but what he did was, and he was at 20 years old, just 20. He's on this transatlantic journey. He's actually coming back to Philadelphia. and he's had some struggles and business dealings that didn't go well. And he realized he needed to improve himself, his character. Okay. So he decides to track what he calls 12 virtues, except for he's not tracking virtues, he's tracking habits, which create virtue, which creates character. In other words, right? If I want to be known, Hallam, as having the honesty virtue, right? Correct? That means I just have the habit of behaving honestly. So what Ben did was decide he was going to track these, he called them virtues, but he was really tracking habits. So he was tracking habits a couple hundred years ago. So you can add that to electricity and the Declaration of Independence and all the other brilliant things this man did. He was intentional about crafting his character, which is his identity. So the second part of your question is, you have these players that want the tour card and they want a different identity. The truth is, you can work it from both sides of the equation. There's even a third side, but really it's okay, and it's important to work that personal narrative. But really, the narrative doesn't mean anything. I can say I'm honest. If I'm running around stealing, that's not gonna. There's no congruency there, right? So it's a three-pronged process for your students, at least 3, maybe 4. They have to have a conducive environment, but they have you as a coach. So that's 1. They have to have a personal narrative that is supportive of where they're trying to go. That's 2. They need to develop the skills and habits that support where they're trying to go. That's a process of intentional practice. That's 3. And then in between, they have to manage the emotions that kind of come and go, the highs and the lows, but that's more ephemeral. So as a coach, and I know Rick and I, we've talked about this a lot, it's the key points when we're working on behaviors and skills is to practice that, but to make sure we have the conducive, supportive environment and the personal narrative that drives that skill change, that behavior change, that habit change. And by the way, I'm using those interchangeably because they really are. Now, a lot of PhDs in behavior science trip all over themselves, sadly, often on podcasts, when somebody says, what's the difference between a habit and skill? And then they go, and they give you some long answer. And I've seen this multiple times. And then ultimately they're like, I don't know. And the answer is they're fraternal twins. They're pretty much the exact same thing. If I have the habit of playing the piano, chances are very good I have the skill of being a piano player. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I covered a lot of ground there.
I love that. And just to, whilst you're on these definitions and the difference between a habit and a skill, how do you define a habit, Martin? Because I'm sure there's a lot of different definitions, but I'd love to hear from you.
So because the definition of habit is a recurring thought or behavior that takes on this form of automaticity, right? It becomes fairly automatic without a lot of conscious thought. So they tend to happen when we're in a familiar environment. You get in your car and you drive home or to work, and sometimes you're parking and you're like, I mean, this happens to me. Did I just drive? Like, we go semi-unconscious. Now we're using the skill to drive, and we're employing the habits that we've developed over time.
Love that. So in terms of, and I've got a question here in terms of habits, because I think this is something that a lot of listeners would be concerned about when they consider implementing habits, implementing structure into their lives, especially when we talk about on the golf course. Do you feel that habits can sometimes stunt creativity, playfulness, and things like that? At Flow, we talk a lot about playfulness, the importance of being in a playful mindset, the importance of creativity as a flow trigger. And sometimes you get that pushback where you say, well, I don't want to be too structured. I don't want to implement all these habits because it's going to take me away from that spontaneity, that creativity, that playfulness. So I guess my question is, what's your response to the person that...
My response is playfulness and creativity, it can be its own habit. It's not, there's nothing that precludes you from being creative because you have certain preparation routines and certain habits. So in my world, I'm not trying to necessarily debunk the question, but in my world, they work together. Does that make sense?
Of course, that makes sense. Makes sense. Sorry.
Right, but the point of it is that I can have a habit of being creative, and I can have a habit of, just being able to brainstorm. Is that a habit on a weekly basis? So I think where Hallam's talking about is we do get these golfers who are so much into routines, and of course routine is, of course, becomes a habit, that I had a question yesterday for somebody: should my routine be exactly the same amount of time, 23 seconds, right? They become so trapped in it has to be some way. They don't allow themselves the freedom to create and adapt and be in the moment. So that's kind of where I was going to go with that kind of same question. Is habits can feel rigid to people, and I know I'm doing a narrative on that, but feel rigid, yet we're trying to create an opportunity for people to know that they can create any habits they want that serve them towards their goals.
I love the comment, and it's easy to get caught up in it. It begins with our understanding of language and how we approach a concept. So if somebody new to this idea that they can craft habits intentionally that support their goals, and then, or they're hearing your coaching and they're coming at your coaching with a certain understanding of habit, then those questions are going to arise. Creativity is often sparked in, I have a diagram in the habit factor. What I believe that in between, some people subscribe to this idea, I certainly do, that this is this kind of super conscious awareness, if you will, and then there's our consciousness, and in between that, Hallam, my theory goes something like this: the subconscious layer is in between. So to connect to this super consciousness, if you will, we must transcend this subconscious level. And that's just a factor of our brain waves. And so while I'm no neuroscientist, you can find this information fairly easily. What happens, I've been told, what we've studied is our brain waves fall into this more theta level. And at the you probably know this is in your golf academy, I'm presuming.
It's all flow, yes.
So at the theta level, that's where habit exists too. So if I'm brushing my teeth, I'm checked out because I'm just like do, and then all of a sudden, whoa, I got to put that on the podcast. And then I run to my other room and I scribble down some notes, and then I finish brushing teeth. What I'm suggesting, this is a very, very long way to do this, is that habit is a conduit. How many times do you get a breakthrough idea when you're driving or you're in the shower, right?
Correct.
So many times.
And that's because you've fallen into this habitual mode where let's call it what it is. Your brain is just taking a rest from consciousness. And so that's a good thing. Now, the mindfulness community who gets into this dichotomous mode of thinking, they're like, habit is bullshit, right? Like, habit is bad. You got to be mindful 7/24. Well, first of all, that's impossible. Second of all, it's not an either or. They work together. Your brain, you're wired for habits to conserve energy, to be efficient. So these things all work together. Is a very long way.
I love that. I love the answer that creativity actually is sparked when you are executing on habits, because that's the whole science behind it. Is you move into the subconscious, you've even transcended the subconscious into the super conscious, and that's so powerful. And I think so many people don't appreciate that. So it's exactly the answer I was looking for, Martin. I love it.
Okay, great.
So Martin, we have these habits that are linked to goals and such, and so now we're starting to see that we're getting closer to our goals. Yet when we look at golf, we practice a lot and we prepare, and yet really what we're looking at is, can we perform that on the golf course with our buddies on Sunday when we're playing for a couple bucks and we have trash talking, and we're just going to call that pressure right now. Okay.
Right.
So you and I have had some great discussions on that word pressure, which is a loaded word. And so I usually pose the question to my golfers at first: is pressure good or bad?
Great.
And the answer that I get is really going to tell me a lot about their mindset, right? So let me throw that to you, Martin. Is pressure good or bad for performance?
First of all, I love the question. I love the topic. And it's very much like, to be clear, I think I spent at least 5, maybe 7 years studying habit before the habit factor came out. I spent another, after tripping over myself in certain performances and questioning others, and not necessarily on the golf course.
Right.
They related to pressure environments. And so what I realized when I finished with the habit factor is, one, I didn't spend enough time talking about the influence of environment on our skills and behaviors. And then I said, if I'm going to spend a lot of time studying the environment, what specifically am I going to study? And it turns out I was captivated by this idea of pressure. And there are experts, no offense out there, experts, they literally say, and there's books, you can find them, pressure is the enemy of success. They literally say it's your nemesis. And the short answer, which I skipped, is it's neutral. Just like habit, pressure doesn't give a hoot. So it can either be incredibly bad or incredibly good. Somebody like Martina Navratilova.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. So Martina intuitively knew that pressure can be, I think her great quote is, pressure is a privilege. And what we find, and I know you know this, when you look at the great athletes, they thrive in pressure. Now the question becomes, should I take it, or do you want to ask me why? Why I think? I mean, I know
why, Martin.
So why? The why can be found in physics, simple physics. So I don't mean to put you guys on the spot again.
Oh no.
This is fun.
I skipped that class too.
Yeah.
So in physics, Hallam, what is the formula for pressure?
Oh, geez.
Google it.
I have no excuse because I'm not that long out of school, so I got nowhere to hide. The formula for
Nowhere to hide. All right. Well,
force. Is it something to do with force? Is it something to do
yes,
with
something? It absolutely has something.
Acceleration. Force equals mass times acceleration, something like that.
No.
No.
I think it's the force and mass, right? How much force is put on a mass? Okay.
So this is, forgive the graphics here. You may not even be able to read it. Can you read it?
Pressure
yes.
Force over acceleration.
A. That's an A. Force over area.
Area.
Okay.
Got it.
So what is area? Well, let me break this down. So pressure is force over area. Let's use a very simple analogy. Have you ever seen anybody lay on a nail intentionally?
I've stood on a nail unintentionally.
So have I.
On one.
Crick, not only did I step on one, but when I went to pull it out, my knee went into another one.
You bit on that one.
So, yeah, that was a lot of fun. So what does this mean? Well, all this means is people don't lay on a nail, they lay on a bed of nails. That's the area is expanding, right? They don't stand on a nail, they stand on a bed of nails. So when here's another example, and I'm going to kind of bounce around and show you how this physics formula, this simple physics formula, applies to everything from performance to standing on a bed of nails. Alcoholics Anonymous provides a support group. A lot of times people feel, and by the way, this applies to any support group, but they feel isolated, alone. So the area is very small and they feel immense pressure. When they increase their support environment, the pressure reduces. This is why support groups are so powerful and helpful. I mean, I was in a group called Entrepreneurs Organization for 10 plus years, and it was founded because too many entrepreneurs were killing themselves. And the idea was, if you could create these support groups, you may be able to prevent that. So as it applies to performance, the answer still fits here, in my humble opinion, right? And the way to increase the area is to plan, know what the outcome is, right? What's the outcome? Prepare, gather resources, read books, get coaches, watch videos, read more books, take lessons, plan, prepare, and then practice. And then there's 4 levels of practice we can go through later if you want. But by doing that, you increase the area, thus you diminish the feeling of pressure. The pressure doesn't go away, it just feels less because you're now comfortable. You're relaxed, so you're able to perform. This is why in championship games, a lot of times the new team, there's a defending champ, they've been there many times, and there's a new team, and they're distracted by the lights. They're not comfortable. The veteran team, more often than not, is comfortable. They understand it. They've planned right. They prepared right, and they practice right. So
I love it. And I think that, at FlowCode, we look at the framing of what pressure means. Great. And then that could, and I may be saying it incorrectly here, but could in essence change your internal support, because you're not fearing something because you're looking at it in a much different way. So we look at, if I ask some of my players, is pressure good or bad? They just jump on and say it's good, because that really makes me know it's important. And when it's important, I go back to my habits of being fully focused and I can't wait, and then other people, it's like, oh no, right. Pressure means that I could fail and I don't want to embarrass myself. And so that association with just the word is enough to trigger a response. How you're saying it, which I like even more, is as a balancing act, is we can do something when we do feel pressure, and I can be prepared, I can be planned in the future, so it doesn't have the same effect on me physiologically or cognitively.
Yeah, and yeah, they work in concert, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I love to say that pressure is good, but the truth of the matter is, if you have to operate on me, brain surgery, and you've never operated, and my head's open, and you're going to feel tremendous pressure, and I'm probably as good as dead, because you haven't planned, you haven't prepared, you don't know. So all I'm suggesting is pressure is both. I lean toward, I love it, and I especially love it when I've planned, prepared, and practiced. And again, there are 4 levels to that practice. You look at Steph Curry, nobody gets rid of the ball faster. And you ask him why. And not that I was talking to him personally, but I've done the research. And what he says is, in practice, he's practicing at such a rate of speed that the game itself seems slow. And so, and I know great coaches like Rick do this, there are ways to enhance the pressure beyond the actual scope of even a championship match in practice, so that, again, the preparation is done, the practice is done, and it feels comfortable no matter the stakes.
Martin, can the way you feel pressure and the way you perceive pressure also be impacted by what you build your self-esteem around? So if you build your self-esteem around being the best, then you may feel stronger pressure than if you build your self-esteem around being the best learner, potentially. So you might have heard the concept of anti-fragility, where actually the more things that are thrown at you, the stronger you become. And that obviously requires being the identity of the learner and onboarding that, rather than onboarding the identity of being the best. So that also surely has an impact on the amount of pressure that you feel or the way you perceive the pressure?
Yes, and what I'm trying to do is scribble a behavior model that I've shared with Rick. There's no way you can read it, but you can get the general consensus, which is 3 circles. And so what you asked about was the internal circle, which is the narrative, right? The story in our head. Look, they all work together. We talked about this at the open. And so if you plan, prepare, and practice, but your internal narrative is, oh, I always suck whenever I'm in the bunker and money's on the line, that's not going to go well. But the truth of the matter is, with the proper planning, preparation, and practice in the bunker, over time, that narrative is going to change. It will. Now, I'm not saying you only do one or the other. You can do both. You can work on the narrative, change that, work on whatever triggers to help a person. Rather, when they see the bunker, they don't go, oh my God, not again in the beach. But they can be like, I love the beach. I mean, the phrase I always say is, this is an opportunity for greatness. My buddy used to say that. It's just the funniest thing. So when you're up against a tree or impossible lie, this is an opportunity for greatness. So it's all these things working together to get the result we're after.
And just to go further on self-narrative. So self-narrative is key, but can we also be influenced significantly by the narrative other people reinforcing us? We are innately social beings, right? And we talk a lot about social flow and how people can access that and benefit from it. I know that if I have a slight inclination that I am good at something, and then Martin or Rick tells me that, Hallam, you know what, you're fantastic at this, I step into that even further and my self-narrative becomes even stronger. Equally, unfortunately, on the reverse, if I know that I have a slight weakness in something and my environment, the people in my environment, the people in my network reinforce that, I probably take ownership of that self-narrative even more. So is that important as well when it comes to, and we can take this into pressure and habits, the people that you're spending time with, your social circle, are going to essentially have a huge impact on both your habitual behaviors, your thoughts, as well as the pressure that you feel and how you interpret it.
So, yeah, it's a great observation. And the answer goes back to the circle. That outer circle is the environment, and those are your friends. And that's also your coach can be there. And that's a resource. And a great coach is feeding that supportive narrative that says you're great when you're in the sand. And he's also saying, you don't listen to these people. It's meaningless what they're telling you. So it may seem important, but it's not. And so it's kind of a nuanced answer, because there's a few ways to pick at that, but we can choose whose advice and opinions we're listening to first. Second, a good coach is going to feed that supportive narrative. And third, we can also pick who we're surrounding ourselves with, what friends. But it's a great question, and they all work together.
When we talk about narrative, because again, we at FlowCode talk a lot about cognitive reframing and self-talk, and I talk a lot about priming emotions of how you want to show up for something. Put your golf hat on now. I know you play a little bit, right? And you know enough of how. I mean, it's. I think you're almost tour level, but you're getting there, right?
Yeah, almost. If Bay counts.
That's right. In the actual performance, we'll call it, from hole 1 to hole 18. I guess I'm trying to ask is that, do you have any habits that are self-awareness and triggers to get you back into, let's say, the present moment?
Wow. Yeah. Breathing. It's funny for me to be giving for using my golf game as a, but
you can learn from anyone, Martin. You can learn from anyone.
But I think there are a few routines that I like to bring into play. Intention, leading into the round. What do I want? I want no doubles. I like to hit a ball around the first tee just to make sure I'm eyeing it correctly. And then on the putting, it's the visualization and the breathing, deep breathing, especially, you know, over a money putt, right? So those sort of things work in concert, and that's where habit and skill development. So being in a, you know, theta mode, and then kind of whipping yourself out and thinking strategically, and really it's a delicate dance in my mind between this executive part of the brain making decisions, which is a huge part of golf, right?
Yes.
And I mean, just when I realized which club to be pulling, that I'd probably save 10 strokes off my game, just that.
Right.
So there, I think important to mention is this delicate dance, if you will, from the executive part of the brain to the limbic system, which is where habits and skills, hardened habits and skills reside. And it's just this dance.
Right. And why I brought that up, and of course, I know you only get to get out on the golf course every now and then, but it's for everyone that people think, oh, I'm only developing habits to things that I'm highly skilled at.
Right.
But I think when we're enjoying a round of golf is an opportunity to say, how do I get more enjoyment out of it? Yes, I want to play better, but when you're talking about breathing and intention and visualization, anybody can do that. Not everybody can hit an iron shot as close as Colin Morikawa all the time, but the mindset he has is, I'm a big believer that we all can achieve that skill through the habits and through those routines. So you're taking the same thing, even though you're not as highly competent on the golf course, you're still creating these routines to get the most out of your skills.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I got intentional, and by the way, there was a point where I'm like, if all I have to do, if I play, because I tend to play almost once a week, but what I realized, if I really wanted to get better, playing 2 or 3 times a week was a significant improvement. And then the other one,
Martin, or just joining FlowCode Golf Academy. That's another solution.
Yeah, and it was also the scoring, like really being intentional about, you know, whether it was a bogey or a par, and just taking the time to score. And by the way, real quick, you know, at the end of 9, I don't want to be more than 3 over, you know, that type of thing, which was a significant jump. So
but the other thing that I learned from, again, your first book, Habit Factor, was I could have my own scorecard that had nothing to do with score for those 18 holes. That, did I commit to a shot? Did I visualize on the shot? So those are those little things that I want people to understand, is that we're all going to be at different levels. Some shoot 70, some shoot 90, yet we can create these habits that we check off on every single intentional shot.
I love it. Yeah. And it could be as simple as stance. It could be as simple as visualizing before you hit, like just stepping back. I mean, sometimes, and I wasn't tracking this, but I certainly could, on a really big putt that's super short, looking up is great, like to the blue sky.
Yes.
In other words, it just expands your perspective, because it's so easy to get myopia, basically, and you're like, oh my God, it's only so, you know, those are things. And then you realize if you miss that putt, you're like, oh, I never did that.
Right. And that's where we can talk about habits, but I do like the last part, is that we do need to reassess of what's happening. Just because I listened to a great podcast with Hallam and Rick about breathing, and I do the breathing, but if it didn't correlate towards the goal, we can always reassess and shift. And I don't think enough people do that. I think they get in their own ruts of habits because they've been told they do it, and they're not really pushing back and say, wait, is this actually getting me closer to where I want to go? So I like having, when you have the habit tracker and you're checking things off,
but you also have to assess whether it's weekly, monthly, and is these habits actually aligned with me getting closer to that goal? I don't think enough people do.
That's a great point. And one of the things on this tracking sheet, thehabitfactor.com/templates, is the comment section. And the idea of putting a comment at the end of the day, it reinforces not only your reflection, but your intention. And that's, I guess, dare I say, a habit. Whether it's a missed shot or a missed putt, nobody is going to be perfect every shot. So the question is, what happened? And it's always like, oh, my grip was wrong, or my stance was wrong, or I didn't take time to do X, Y, Z. But that goes back, that reminds me of the importance of reflection. And, it was Aristotle who said, wisdom is equal measure experience plus reflection. Wisdom is equal measure experience plus reflection. And so every failure, every mistake is an opportunity, I think, to reflect and become a better player, whether that's on the course or in life, right?
So just to take that a step further, because I think it's such an interesting point on the reassessment, ensuring you reflect, are you moving forward? Are you actually achieving the desired result? Because we can get stuck in this mentality of just complete the habit without actually reassessing. But on that note, it must be a really fine balance, because my generation, I think a lot of us are crippled by this desire for instant gratification.
Yep.
Everything is in the palm of our hand. We can get Amazon deliveries within hours now, sometimes even minutes. It's crazy. We want everything right now. Habits don't work that way, right? So if you want your desired result, it's not going to happen overnight. So how do we ensure that when we are doing that reassessment component of your process, of your framework, how do we ensure that we're not falling into the trap of wanting instant gratification, and that making sure we understand that this will take time? Gratification will be delayed.
I think the answer is in your question. It comes sometimes with maturity and an understanding. I mean, it was our generation, not yours, that grew up. There's no more basic a need than food. And we grew up, we're the microwave generation. So you want a hot meal, 30 seconds, you get a hot meal. And that really programmed, in many ways, probably ruined our generation from a psychological standpoint. I don't think anybody's ever said that, but I'm being a bit extreme. But the point is, at the most basic level, we get stuff instantly, food, Amazon deliveries. What I've fallen in love with, probably 40 years too late, is the process. And I think that's the beginning of mastery. So some of the things we teach are, in the habits and goals class is this idea of personal mastery. And mastery is just practice, and it's one day at a time. So being aware that we are programmed for instant gratification, being aware of that, and then just Xing that out and realizing it's a process is the first step.
Love that.
Very good.
Yeah.
So Martin, as we wrap up here, we've certainly talked about habits, we've talked about pressure, we've talked about narrative, and putting those all together, right?
Yeah.
And are there any, personally, any new habits that you're forming right now?
Oh man, well, the big one was more skill than habit, but I was tracking it, and it was kite surfing. So, yeah. And that was a monster one, because where I live, San Diego, the winds aren't typically strong enough. So it was just a battle of perseverance. And I wish I could show you the log. It's hilarious. It's like all I did was pump up the kite, and then it couldn't even fly it, pack it all up. 2 hours later, I'm back home, and I never even got. So I would be like, well, it was good practice, just pumping up the kite and rigging the kite. And so it was just utter frustration for almost a year. The other ones is right now it's finishing this book. I'm very, very close. So I'm tracking that. not necessarily a new habit, but the most important goals, I will track the supportive behaviors, the habits. So writing, and then health. So burpees, and then some core work. That's what I'm tracking right now. Very simple.
All right.
Martin,
Yeah.
Sounds good.
from writing these books, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned? Because I think that if we go to delayed gratification and we go to focusing on the process, there's nothing more difficult. I don't know from personal experience. I know Rick does. I'm sure I will in the future. But what have you learned from that process? Because that's a tough task to take on, and it requires huge amount of habit formation.
It's a great question, and it's very related to your last one. I saw this post 4 months ago, and it was this gal. She's like, anything you put your mind to, you can do. And she's like, I wrote my book overnight. And I love this girl. I mean, I absolutely love this girl. And I was like, what a shame. What a tragedy. Like the longer I take on a book, the more great ideas come my way, and I can, and so it's almost like weaving, not that I've ever weaved. I told Dave, a mutual friend of ours, it's like capturing butterflies. So that's my big, if the question is what lesson have I learned, is don't rush it. Do not rush the process. Marinate on these ideas, and the longer, the better. Now, to a certain extent, I mean, I'm not sure it's gonna, this book is going on about 7 years, so I'm gonna pull it out of the oven. It's done marinating. But that's the big tip, is don't try to write a book in a month. Don't try to write a book in a week or a day. Just let it unfold.
Love that. That kind of comes back to the conversation earlier on the process of becoming versus the moment of achieving. And it actually comes from, and controversial, or he's a bit like Marmite, we would say here in UK, but Gary Vaynerchuk. And he talks a lot about people saying, why don't you just buy the New York Jets? You have the money, you have everything you need to buy the New York Jets. And he says, look, this is what people don't understand. I want the process of becoming the owner of the New York Jets more than I want to be the owner of the New York Jets. And that's kind of what I'm getting with you writing your book, is you want the process of becoming the author of this book more so than you actually just want to be the author of the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm not sure he has the money to buy the Jets, but but it's the same thing over again and over again. It works in concert. I mean, the fact is, I wrote a book, it was a bestseller, and I still didn't necessarily have that self-narrative that I was an author. In fact, I just wanted to write it, put it out there, and go hide type thing. Like, I had other things to do, a business, a family. I didn't want to be, so working on these things in concert together, the narrative, the habits and skills, the supportive environment, is going to bring the quickest results. So one of the things relative to this workshop, interestingly enough, these people, it's a coaching group in Malaysia and the Philippines, and I've shared this with Rick, but these 3 circles, we have to transcend all of them for personal transformation, for goal achievement. So Gary is right-ish. he wants to become that person, great, but he's gonna, he can become it, but if he doesn't actually purchase them, he's not the owner. So they got to work together.
Absolutely. No, I love that. Makes complete sense.
Great. Well, I want to respect your time, Martin. We told you 40 minutes, and now we're on to 55 minutes. So, I again want to thank you for being on, because you made a huge impact on my coaching back when I first read The Habit Factor, because it was something that I could apply not only to my life, but to my coaching practice. We've got to know each other and become friends. Second book, Pressure Paradox, helped, I think, reaffirm some of the things that I had learned with sports psychology. And now you put it in such a way of that. And then I'm looking forward to the next book. which I've got to read most of it, so I know it's going to be
wrote
extremely.
the foreword.
I know.
My life. You wrote the foreword and then you narrated it. And by the way, I had so much fun seeing you a couple weeks ago at Riviera. So, and that means the world to me that you became I said it earlier, but the first Habit Factor certified coach. You're a world-class coach. You're finally getting some of the respect.
Thank you.
Deserve. You're just such a student. You're a master and a student, and that's what makes you so great. And I am honored beyond belief that you are the one who became the first.
Thanks, Martin. Please share with our listeners where they can learn more about you. And we know the books can be found Amazon and independent bookstores, but please tell us more about where people can connect with you.
So the easiest thing to do is go to thehabitfactor.com. You can find the book. You can Google that. If you're looking for the free tracking sheet, that can be found also at thehabitfactor.com/templates. Our latest program right now anyways, promotional pricing is like $27. It's called Automatic Goals. And if you go to automaticgoals.com, you can read all about it. It kind of has my origin story, and you get the book, you get the audio files. It's way underpriced, but that's not my decision. So I think those are some good, quick resources for somebody to get up to speed. There's also the Habits to Goals podcast.
Awesome.
If you liked anything you heard, there's a lot more of that there.
For sure.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Martin, thank you, and an honor to meet you as well. First time obviously chatting, but really enjoyed that, and that's some really interesting conversations for all the listeners. I know they'll love it, but please, as always, listeners, please provide feedback. I'm sure if you have any additional questions as well, please fire them to myself. You can send that to my email at hallam@theflowcode.com. And I may even be able to reach out and ask Martin some of those questions if we do have any more. But what an episode. And we may have to do another one in the future, because I'm sure there's going to be some more topics from the new book that we want to speak about as well. So absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you. My honor and privilege and pleasure, and very fun too. So thanks.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I know you've received some incredible information, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. Rick, how can our listeners learn more about the FlowCode Golf Academy?
Are you a coach or a player? Well, I've created 2 free masterclasses. One for a coach to help you grow your mental game coaching business, and one for a player to master your mental game. Head over to www.flowcode.golf to gain free access now.